Welcome to Creating a Family. Talk about adoption and foster care. I am so looking forward to today's show. We're going to be interviewing a panel of young adult adoptees that were raised in an open adoption. So we're going to be talking all about open adoption, but from the perspective of the party in the triad that really counts the most, and that is the adoptee perspective. So we've got 5 adoptees, and I'm going to begin by introducing them and then having them start by giving you a very brief bio of what their open adoption journey was. What is their open adoption? What did it look like? Was it just phone calls? Was it exchange of emails or letters between the parents? Were there visits? That type of information. And also what it looks like now. All 5 of the adoptees were adopted at birth. All grew up knowing they were adopted, and all are now in their 20s, with the exception of one, and that's Justin Roberts. And we'll actually start with him. All 5 have had varying degrees of openness in their adoptions, and of course, they have varying experiences with both adoption and openness. So, Justin just turned 30. Everybody else is in their 20s. Justin, if you could start, tell us about what was openness like in your adoption growing up, and what does it look like now?
Well, mine may be a little bit different than others. I'm actually the second adoptee in my family. My brother was adopted 2.5 years prior, and my parents found out that they couldn't have kids, so they were looking to adopt. So they adopted my brother, and then 2.5 years later, were paired up with my birth mother, and then I came along. And in the early days, it was letters back and forth, and then telephone conversations, and all the way up until today, I've got pretty much everybody's phone number, and we can text and get a response within 30 seconds. So it has evolved as technology has evolved, and communication is as open as it could be.
Excellent. Okay. Our next adoptee is Ariel, and let me make sure I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. Is it Verosky?
Verosky, correct.
Excellent. Ariel Verosky. Okay. Can you tell us what openness looks like in your adoption as you were growing up and what it looks like now?
Absolutely. So I was born and raised in Portland, Oregon, and that's where my adoption took place, and was very fortunate to have my adoptive parents and my birth parents and all of the half-birth siblings that I have now, all based in Portland. So the level of openness was always there. I remember actually meeting them in person as young as really the first real memory I have is my 10th birthday. And I remember we were at a park in outside of Portland, and I remember all of my parents were there, and that was the first point when I think I could understand and articulate, those are my adoptive parents, those are my birth parents, these are the siblings I have and how they're all connected. So the level of openness has always been there. It's only gotten stronger as I've gotten older and been more of an adult myself and been able to, closely communicate with them. Everyone still lives in Portland, other than myself, who's in Denver now, and my birth father, who just recently moved to Michigan. So the level of openness has been very strong, and something that's been really important for us to continue cultivating.
Okay, excellent. Next up is Andrew Friesen. Andrew, what did your openness look like, and what does it look like now?
So actually, I had a similar story with Justin. Is my parents were both told that my adopted parents, they were told that they couldn't have kids. So I actually have an older brother who's adopted. He's about 3 years older than me. So it was kind of nice to grow up going through things and having him there to be able to talk to about certain things. But for me, the adoption was open, but I can't say there was a lot of open communication. There was definitely some in the beginning days, but it wasn't directly to me. It was more emails and some letters back and forth between birth mother and adopted mother. But nowadays, I don't really talk to her at all, but I actually was able to find my birth father, which was, a long, complicated story in itself, but him and I actually have a pretty good relationship. So him and I talk a lot.
So in summary, there was a pretty limited openness and then none really now, no communication now, other than with your
Yeah.
birth mother, but not with your birth father. With your birth father, there is
Hmm.
communication between the two of you.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So it was a little bit of a different experience of a open adoption, because I would say it was kind of more just, you know, it happened, but it didn't happen often.
And there was not, from your standpoint, as a child, there was very little connection there.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
Okay. Next up is Elizabeth Rentschler.
Hello.
Hey there. Tell us your experience growing up in an open adoption, and then what it looks like now.
Well, my open adoption story is a little bit different. I actually did not have a great experience with open adoption. My birth mother was a drug addict and an alcoholic. So when she came back into my life as a 7-year-old, it was a pretty rocky re-entry, you might say. And we did have a fair amount of communication when I was younger, with visits and overnight stays and vacations. And it was actually pretty good. She was in rehab, and she got her life back together. But unfortunately, she started to relapse, and because of that, those addictions that she still carries today, it was not a safe place for me to continue. So, as of this point in time, I have no communication with anybody in my birth family. All of them really have drug and alcohol problems. I do have a little bit of communication with my step birth grandfather, so my birth grandmother's second husband, but that has not gone very smoothly, and I don't know if I'll be able to continue that communication. So we had a lot, but it really wasn't a good situation for either party.
When your birth mother, and I assume your birth father, were
Actually, no. He disappeared during her pregnancy, so I never
okay.
knew my birth father.
Okay, so it's just the birth. So there was some degree of openness with your birth mom when she was sober and straight, but
Yeah.
when she relapsed, it became difficult.
Yeah, she also had a number of personal differences with my birth family. So there was a lot of religious differences and political differences that made communication really difficult for both birth families. So as kind of like that connecting link between both families, it was a very stressful situation for me to be in as a child.
When you said she had conflicts, religious, political, you said with your birth family, with her birth family, you mean with your adoptive family? Did I understand
Yes,
that correctly?
I'm sorry. Yes,
No,
with
it's
my
okay.
adoptive family. She was very she was a Christian and we were not Christians. She was very conservative and we grew up in a very liberal community. So there was a number of differences that just made it very difficult for both families to try to get along. So as a child in that situation, it wasn't great.
Yeah, it was stressful. Okay. And last but certainly not least is Taylor Roghair. Taylor, did I pronounce your last name
Rogue
correctly?
hair, but that's okay.
I bet you get that a lot.
Yeah.
But sorry about that. Taylor Roghair. Tell us about growing up in an open adoption, what it was like for you as a child, and then what is it like now that you're an adult?
So I think mine might be the most open out of this group. My birth mom is only like 14 and a half years older than I am. So when I was growing up, she was around, like, on and off. We would go through periods where she'd be around a lot, and then periods where I wouldn't see her for like a year or two, and then I'd see her a lot. But she was around kind of as early as my first birthday. Um, so she came to like all my early birthdays up until 8 or 9. And she would come over for sleepovers, and we would have like weekends. And uh, she she's still she's moved to Arizona, so it's a little harder to see her. But she grew up in Sweet Home, so kind of a small town in Oregon. I grew up and was adopted in Portland. So with regards to that, I think maybe I've seen my birth aunt a lot more. Her older sister lived like 15 or 20 minutes away driving. So I grew up seeing her and my great grandma a lot more. But I still, we're both really bad at texting and calling. So other than that, we would like talk a lot, but so I talked to them. I visited her for a couple weeks in Arizona when I was in high school. But she has 5 boys now. So, and they're all between 9.5 and 23 years younger than me. So it's a big age gap. But
Yeah.
as far as like openness, I definitely knew that I wasn't my parents. I didn't come from my mom's tummy, my adopted mom. Like I knew that by age 4, and I knew where I came from, but I wasn't necessarily, sure on all of the aspects. But so
I think that's pretty typical. I mean, children don't really understand the nuanced parts but they can understand the big broad strokes. They can understand
yeah.
adoption. Yeah. Okay.
And then my birth father was not ever in the picture.
Let me ask, and it sounds like, with the exception of Andrew, does anybody have a relationship with their birth father? Justin, do you have a relationship is your birth father in your life at all?
Yes. And I, like the others, have known my whole life that I've been adopted. And I did forget to mention physically interacting and not just snail mail or over the phone. They are also up in the Portland area. I was born and my adoptive parents live in Eugene, still in the same house that I was brought home to. And so I would see both sides, my birth mother and birth father, about once a year or so. And now my birth father, he remarried and had 3 kids. And so I have 3 half siblings. And everybody is on Facebook. And his mom, my birth grandma, is kind of the family wrangler. And if you want to find somebody, you go through her. And she can pretty much track down anybody in the family.
Okay. So one of the major arguments we hear against open adoption is that it's going to be confusing to the children. The children who are adopted, that the children who won't know who their real parents are, and I put real in air quotes there, or they will feel torn between 2 families, or that it will make them feel different. So some variation of that is what we hear about openness. So I'd like to ask you guys what you think about that. Was it confusing? Did it make you feel different? Were you torn between families? Ariel, let's start with you on this one.
Absolutely. I do think that's a common question. I get that a lot from friends and people that I meet that ask me about my adoption. I wasn't confused at all. My parents, both sides, were very open about the situation. From, they probably told me when I was 1. I don't think I understood it until I was a little bit older, but I've never been confused or didn't understand that my adopted parents were my parents. They raised me, they put in the work, they did all the parenting. My birth parents were also my parents. They, physically, gave birth to me. But it was never any confusion. It's complicated in a sense. It's not your, quote unquote standard upbringing. I know a handful of people that were adopted, not many. So people have questions and they're curious, but as a child growing up and as a grown adult now, I was never confused. It was frankly a blessing that I was able to grow up with 2 adoptive parents, siblings, step parents, and 2 birth parents, siblings, step parents. It wasn't confusing for me.
So would you buy the what we hear people say is, in the children, the more love, the better, the more people who love the child, the better, that type of thing? Would that be an accurate summation of your experience?
Absolutely.
Okay, Taylor, what about you? Was it confusing for you to be raised with two sets of parents?
Well, so I wouldn't necessarily say that like my birth mom was a parent figure.
Mm-hmm.
Because of like the closeness in age, she sort of fastened herself on as like an older sibling.
Mm-hmm.
So so I was raised like with kind of like this older sister figure. But like I knew that like she was the person who'd had me.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like it was never in question as to like who my mom and dad were.
Mm-hmm.
Or
She
like
didn't try to play that role at all.
no. She was like Becca's an interesting person. She had like her own stuff to deal with and her own kind of growing up to do because she was really like a sophomore in high school when she had me. So she was a
Mm-hmm.
kid that had a kid.
Yeah, exactly.
And she made the decision at like 14 and a half to not go through the Boys and Girls Aid Society because she wanted a relationship with me instead of, I guess, a more closed.
Okay.
But no, there were never, I mean, people were like, I mean, I used to, what's it like to be adopted? It's like, what's it like to have brown hair? What's it like to
Yeah.
have blue eyes? Like, it's normal.
Yeah.
But
It is
so
what
it like,
it's what it is for you.
but I think in the sense that kids figure out a lot more than anyone kind of thinks they do. So it's like if you don't tell them, they know, but they don't know what you're not telling them. So then that leaves it up to them really to like speculate on the why and all the reasons behind it, which creates its own kind of sets of doubts as to like why aren't you telling me, like why are you hiding something, especially if you don't look like your parents. I actually look like my parents, which is a little weird.
I do too.
Yeah, so do I.
But so that's like a little odd because just like looking at me, you're like, oh, you look like these people. But if you like put my birth mom and I next to each other, like we really look the same.
Well, okay, so that's an argument. One of the arguments in favor of why, and actually one of the big reasons that we have moved to openness in adoption is because it's supposed to take the what ifs and the unknowns out, and we believe that is good for people, good for children being raised to have access to answers to questions of why am I not being raised by the people who gave birth to me, and why did you place me for adoption, and all of that. So, and let me go back to you, Taylor. And so, because your birth mom was a part of your life, were you able to get easy answers to questions? And do you think that was, and if so, was that advantageous for you?
Yeah. So that was, for me, that was like, it was good to hear the reasoning. And like my parents would kind of tell me, but they would, they'd like dial it down and stuff. But kind of by the time, I mean, like her story's not great, because she was 14 and my birth father was 19. So, and it was a non-consensual. So like the whole thing, right? So when I say dial it down, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
But whenever I would ask her something straight, like she'd never hide it, because that's like her view is like, if a kid's going to ask, you might as well just like tell them
Mm-hmm.
and kind of explain it. My cousin actually had a ridiculously hard time with this. I have a bunch of cousins that are a lot younger. So I had to go through the whole, why were you adopted with one of them. Just, and like that, it was interesting to kind of see somebody who wasn't adopted, but who was like trying to understand it.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I do think that sometimes other kids, And also other kids are more blatant about asking questions. Adults generally, have enough sense to keep their questions to themselves. Justin, I was trying to, I'm going to be focusing the question on confusion to those of you who had more of interaction and birth parents that were more involved in your raising, and I believe yours were. So was it confusing to you to have two sets of parents?
No, and I'll give the same answer I did 18 years ago when I was on the last Open Adoption Family Services panel, a lifetime ago. But no, short answer is I was never confused. I have always known, and I don't know if it makes it easier or if there's any benefit at all to having my older brother also be adopted. But as far as I know, he was never confused, and we've both known as long as we can remember. And they've been in our lives up until a certain point. My brother's birth mother and birth father are now deceased, and so they're no longer in the picture. But my side of the family, my birth family, both sides are still around, and easy communication. If I've got something that's come up with me, a doctor says, "Oh, well, that's hereditary. That kind of makes sense." But then I say, "Well, I'm adopted, so it shouldn't." But I have that open communication, so I can just text somebody in the family and say, "Hey, has this happened to you before?"
Yeah. And I think, the other thing is the beauty of social media does make it so much easier nowadays without having, with limited effort, it feels like. All right, so let's talk about, we've kind of alluded to some of this with Taylor's comment about the ability to the unknown, the answering of the unknowns, and then Justin's comment about medical history. But I'd like to talk about, from your standpoint, first of all, let's talk about what some of the advantages that you perceive to an open adoption. And then I'd like to talk about some of the disadvantages. Andrew, let's start with you. I know your adoption was not terribly open, so it's fair to say that you really don't know the answer to this, but what would you perceive to be some of the advantages, even to the limited degree that your adoption was open?
Well, I mean, there has been an okay amount of communication in the sense that as I've gotten older, I've pursued finding answers to things. I've come to understand that my birth mother is a compulsive liar, and so she really only says things to protect herself. But if I directly go to her, I can sometimes get these answers that I need. So I actually know more about myself and my family from the past 3 years than I have ever before. Not through a lot of communication, but through some essential points. But no, open adoption it is definitely something that I think is better. Especially for the child, because I think that oftentimes there's just things and feelings that a child needs to understand, and as much as an adopted parent wants to help them out and make them feel loved, which is usually never in question. I don't know about everyone else here, but when I was younger, I definitely could feel like at family dinners that I was still slightly different than everyone else, and there was just something that wasn't quite the same there. And then it wasn't until I got older where I kind of began to understand, like, oh well, it is because I'm slightly different, but it doesn't make me not a part of the family. So open adoption, I would say, is probably the best way to go forward with an adoption. My older brother he was in a pretty open adoption as well. He got to see his birth mother, so I actually met her a couple times. But um, I don't know. Sometimes there's just questions that you need to
Okay.
have answers to, and it's just best to have the ability to receive the answers.
To receive them. Okay.
Mhm.
Ariel, from your standpoint, yours was a very open and it sounds like a pretty positive open relationship. So what would you say some of the advantages are for children in particular, or if you feel comfortable saying what you think the advantages might be for your both sets of your parents?
Yeah, I think, the ability to ask those questions about, the thing that's jumping to my mind is the medical history piece. Like Justin said, they ask about your medical history and you sort of say,
Yeah.
well, I don't, I either know or I don't know. When I was a young teen, I had really bad migraines, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong. And they asked about my medical history, and we finally realized that my birth mom had also had migraines as a teenager and that she grew out of them. And I too grew out of them. So it was just one of those moments where we all said, we're really grateful that we could ask that. Literally my adopted mom picked up the phone, called my birth mom, said, hey, did you ever have this challenge as a teenager? And she said, yeah, I did. So those are huge advantages, from the medical side, of understanding the history and being aware of, things that are genetic and things you need to watch out for as you grow older. But I think emotionally for the kid, the advantages are knowing that there are doors that are open to ask those questions. My adoptive parents got most of my questions because they were present, in the household growing up, but they were not afraid to say, that's a great question for your birth mom or your birth dad. And my birth parents were open to answering questions. My birth mom was also extremely young when I was born, and, not a planned, not a planned scenario, but she was never, she didn't lie about what happened. She was very open and honest about it. And those were questions I had, because one of the worst questions I was ever asked by a friend in middle school, I think, was, well, are you upset that your birth parents abandoned you? And I said, well, that's not the case. That's not the case at all. And let me tell you why. Here was my birth mom, who was young, and I, wasn't planned. And she did an amazing thing by, having me going through a pregnancy in high school, putting me up for adoption, providing, a child to my adoptive parents who couldn't have their own kids. So those were all questions that I had and stories I wanted to understand. And, having 4 people who were totally open books, really, there were no questions, and that led to there being no confusion. So.
Okay, Elizabeth, your experience it was an open adoption, but it was only really open for a short period, and then it was more
In
strained.
terms of, I would say 10 or 11 years. So.
Oh, it was open for 10 or 11?
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, so what were some of the advantages that you felt that you or your either set of parents got from openness? And then I'd like to move into some of the disadvantages.
To be honest, I don't have the same answers as the rest of the panel. I don't have a lot of positive experiences to walk away from. I guess the only thing I could say for an advantage is, there is something intangible that you get from having blood relatives. I look very much like my adoptive mother. If you were to she showed me a picture once of her at 14 and me at 14, and I legitimately thought it was me. And we have a lot of the same mannerisms. And when I was there, I could feel that connection. However, it was never an open connection. So, I was too young to really think about, maybe I should get a medical history. So I don't have that information. And now I never can, that will forever be closed.
Yeah, okay, so you didn't have the advantages because you weren't able to ask. Did your adoptive parents ask your birth mom any of that information? I mean, people weren't thinking about it as much back then either, I don't think.
They asked a little bit. They wanted to know any life, if there was cancer in the family, which there isn't. I know that my birth grandmother suffered also from migraines, but she grew out of it. I never had that problem, thankfully. But really what they were focusing on at the time was the drug and alcohol problems. So that seemed to take forefront. So that was really the thing that was the main topic of conversation.
Was it helpful? Has it been helpful in your life to know that you have a genetic history of addiction?
It has been. As I as I was watching them and going through those years of watching them relapse, because it was a family problem, I think it's made me very, very careful around drugs and alcohol. So I will never be the one going out on a Friday night and getting drunk and then not being able to go home, So I think it's provided a little bit with that. It's also nice to give the doctors some background, although I don't drink and I don't take drugs. So that has limited use
Mhm.
at times.
And you don't have a lot of other medical. All right, so now let's shift to talking about some of the disadvantages. And Elizabeth, I'm going to stick with you on this one because I think you have experienced some of the disadvantages. Can you articulate for us some of um, the the disadvantages? Now, I know that you came from kind of a different philosophical, religious, political background. Was that in and of itself the problem, or is it the way that it was expressed, or what were some of the disadvantages of an open adoption from your perspective?
The two sets of parents hated each other, essentially. It was
Mm.
like a really bad divorce where both sides cannot stand to look at one another. They did not have the same parenting styles. They did not have the same religious views. They did not have the same political views. They did not agree on what was best for me. So every time they got together, it involved some type of argument. And
Ah,
also, the birth parents could tell that there was alcohol problems starting to crop up, which were lied about. And since they didn't have a lot of connection, they could never prove to anybody that this was a problem and that I shouldn't be in that scenario.
you mean your adoptive parents were sensing that your birth parents were having an
Yeah,
alcohol and drug problem? Gotcha.
yeah.
Okay.
So there was just a whole lot of communication problems. My birth parents, my birth mother especially, um, lied a lot, and they took the form that they had to fix me because my adoptive parents had done everything wrong. So as a kid, I felt like I had to fix it. I felt like I had to protect my adoptive parents from my birth parents. And I felt I had to lie to my birth parents about what my adoptive parents were telling me because I didn't want to upset everyone.
So you were caught in between, or you felt caught in between two very disparate worldviews, parenting views, and everything else.
Yeah, and that took a great emotional toll. It was a huge stress. I started hiding the problems that I was seeing with my birth parents from my adoptive parents. I started straight out lying to my birth parents about what my adoptive parents were saying to me, like, your birth mom has an alcohol problem. That wasn't okay to say to my birth mother, that we knew that she was having a problem. So I think that's I think that's a story that often gets not told because open adoption, I still believe, is the best option. It's a wonderful thing for a child to have, but I think we also have to recognize that oftentimes, if the two sets of parents don't agree, that can put the child in a really, really stressful situation,
Mm.
and that needs to be recognized.
Yeah, for sure. Justin, yours was a more positive relationship. Can you think of some disadvantages that either you experience or you think that either set of parents experience with openness?
Um, I it's I wouldn't say it's hard to think of some, but it sometimes you would hear on TV, or somebody would try to make fun of somebody because they were adopted. They'd say, "Oh well, ha ha, you're adopted, or you're not like everybody else." But I never understood that because adoption has been a positive thing in my life. Because my birth parents were so young, and my birth mother decided to put me up for adoption. It's always been a positive thing. Um, they there are some definite disadvantages, I guess, in terms of the medical history, because sometimes you don't know how to answer the question on the spot, and you have to go home or text somebody and figure it out. And sometimes I too have been dealing with some migraines, and I'm the only one, so I'm kind of on my own. But hopefully, like the others, I grow out of them.
Yeah. There you go. All right.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about what your adoptive parents and your birth parents did right as far as, and I don't mean adoption in general or raising you in general. Clearly, they did a fantastic job because you guys are all amazing. But I'm really speaking only of from an openness standpoint. Ariel, what would you say that your adoptive parents and then what your birth parents did right in relation to open adoption? Because yours is such a positive experience.
Mm-hmm. My birth parents, I think, were trying to be pretty selective in who they chose. They tried as best they could to find an adoptive family that was similar to them. And they put in a lot of effort to build that relationship. So my birth parents were in their late teens, and my adoptive parents were in their early 30s, or mid 30s. So there was they were at different stages in their life, but here they were coming together, around the common cause, which was me. And they put in a lot of effort to build the relationships, and probably some awkward conversations and some weird feelings that frankly none of them probably expected to have. I mean, there's all sorts of things that we as adoptees and frankly anyone that hasn't been an adoptive or birth parent, we can't understand, because we don't know what that was like. But I think they did a good job of communicating regularly. Luckily, we were all in the same Portland metro area, so it made it easy for that communication. But my birth father wasn't very close with his father, and leaned a lot on my adoptive father to be there for him, and they have a good relationship. So I think it was a lot of work that they put in to strengthen that relationship, which did wonders for me, because we'd have family dinners or birthdays or events where I'd see my birth parents and my adoptive parents hanging out and interacting and laughing, and I'm not saying that their views were all the same. I'm sure that there were moments where my adoptive parents made a decision on parenting me, and my birth parents said, well, I wouldn't have done it that way, or whatever. But the relationship, from my point of view, was always strong communication, them being friendly, them being supportive. And I will say that all happened despite multiple divorces, which were very challenging for me as a child. My adoptive parents divorced and remarried. My birth parents were never actually married, but have both been through marriages and divorces. So lots of moving parts, but despite all of that, I still felt like there was a cohesive unit, and that allowed me to grow up in an environment where I had support, which was really huge.
Okay. Taylor, what about you? What would you say your parents, your adoptive parents, and your birth mom did right when it comes to openness?
Well, so my birth mom was like really, really selective on who she picked. She actually chose my parents based off of the parents she wished she had growing up. So she came from a really kind of negligent background, and just no support and kind of awful home life. But that was like how she did it, and she didn't really have any kind of objections to what my parents were doing, really, I don't think, because they ended up kind of parenting her also. So they were kind of so my parents were 42 when they got me, I think.
They could easily have been her parent. She was 14. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, yeah. So they could have, so it really kind of was because they weren't at all even like close in age. I think like that helped.
I can see that. Yeah.
But so, and just kind of how she placed herself as more of kind of like a sibling or an aunt instead of like a parent, just kind of gave over all of kind of the rules and like the raising style, I guess. I think maybe the only thing I can think of is I'm hyperactive, which seems to run in the family a little. But my birth family doesn't really do medication. Not really. And my parents like put me on that at about 7. So I think that might have kind of been the biggest difference in like things that they would have done differently.
Okay, now let's talk about some of the things that you wished either set of parent had done differently. Now, Elizabeth, you're the one I'm going to start with because I imagine you've thought about this, um, having been caught between. What do you wish? Let's start with your adoptive parents. What do you wish they would have done different that might have made things easier for you?
Honestly, I don't think that, because I was hiding so much trying to protect them, with everything that was being hidden, I think that they made the best choice that they could with the information they had. So honestly, with them, I don't think that they could have done anything better, simply because they did everything they could that they thought was right. So I put them on that pedestal for trying the best that they could, even though their kid and their surrogate parent, the birth parents, were both in essence lying to them, some with better intentions than others.
Mhm.
With my birth parents, there's not much good that I can say. I think the best choice that they ever did was leave, which is depressing now that I say that, but it's true.
Leave,
They-
meaning leave the open adoption or leave
yeah,
you?
yeah. Essentially, now this is, I have that legal right to go,
Hmm.
but to find them, will I ever take that? No, I don't think so. Because the experience was hard enough that I really don't think there is anything positive to gain going back to it. Even with my birth grandfather, he is the only one I would consider even trying to reach out to. But quite frankly, that's been hard enough as it is.
Hmm. Andrew, what about you? What are there things that you can think of that your adoptive parents or your birth parents could have done differently that would have made things better for you?
Well, definitely my birth mother could have been a little bit more truthful and open and communicative. So I mean, there's many things there that could have been better, but now as I'm older, I understand kind of why the situation is the way it is, and it makes sense, and I don't really um, get too worked up over it when I think about it. It's like, she did what she had to do, and like everyone else here, the best thing that she ever did for me was putting me up for adoption. Um, my adopted parents, I mean, they've been great. There's almost nothing I can say. There has been a couple times where they've kind of kept that there was a little bit of communication between them and my birth mother. There's this little phase where they kind of did that, but I'm pretty good with computers, so I figured that out. Yeah, yeah, my mom was kind of shocked. My adoptive mom was kind of shocked when she realized I actually knew that it was going on the entire time that it was going on, because yeah. So that was a little
Yeah.
awkward for her. So outside of that, no, I mean they were amazing. They still are, very supportive, and like everyone else, my mom was quite young, 17, so that's a little bit, that's old compared to some people's parents here, birth parents when they had them. But now I'm going to school. I grew up in a great place, and obviously Oregon is the best state, so couldn't complain about that. So no, yeah, there's not much that I can say is I would complain about when it comes to my birth parents or my adopted parents.
Let me pause here to remind everyone that this show is underwritten by the Jockey Being Family Foundation, and they want all adoption agencies to know that they have a backpack program for newly adopted kids. Agencies need only apply in order to have their newly adopted families or children receive a backpack. It has the initials embroidered on it for the child, and it has a bear and a blanket inside, and it also has a parent tote full of information to help adoptive parents. It's free for adoption agencies. It's free for families. You need only go to the jockeybeingfamily.com website, and sign up under their backpack program. All right. I think that we hear in the, I mean, I'm immersed in adoption world, of course, as an adoption educator. So I think that others believe that by opening up adoptions, we take away any potential negative feelings adoptees may have about adoption. And that almost it may be a panacea for everything, and maybe it is. That's what I want to ask you guys. Do you think that open adoption makes the whole adoption experience? I think what the fear is that adopted children would feel, and I can't remember which one of you said abandoned. Oh, Ariel, it was you, was talking about a friend in middle school. Middle school's a tough time. And a friend in middle school said something to you about your parents abandoning you. And I think that we think in terms of we want to believe, perhaps, as I'm also an adoptive parent, I want to believe that, openness could take away any potential uh, feelings of abandonment or feelings of angst or just feelings of not fitting in adoption or feeling different because you're adopted. So, Errol, let's start with you. Any thoughts on that? Does open adoption take care of that, or is that inherent in adoption itself and open adoption doesn't change it?
I think it took care of it for me. Like I said earlier, there was no confusion. I never had a moment that I remember sitting around our, a family event saying, gee, I'm different. I just felt, Laura and Nick were my parents, and that was not confusing for me. I think open adoption does fix a lot of those things. I also preface that by saying every family is different, every child is different, every situation is different, and things that are one way, 1 year change over time. No person's story is the same, but, I know people who have had closed adoptions, and on top of the angst and challenge of being a teenager, they were also trying to find their birth parents. And I didn't have to deal with that. Whether your birth parents are the people that you want them to be or not want them to be, I knew that. That was very clear. They were right in front of me. I had questions. I got them answered. My friends that had closed adoptions were wondering and questioning and doubting themselves. And then in one scenario, she met her birth mom, and her birth mom didn't want anything to do with her. I mean, it was traumatizing. And I'm not saying there aren't challenges with open adoptions. Like I said, every family and scenario are different. But for me, having the openness, and obviously starts out with a legal requirement for there to be communication, but after a while it's just second nature. Everyone wants to stay in touch and be communicative. That eliminated the challenges for me as an adoptee.
Justin, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really remember any big challenges. I do think I'm forgetting the question, so if you could repeat that would be great.
Fair enough. And I kind of wandered around that question rather than asking it directly. It was the idea that openness will take care of adoptees perhaps feeling abandoned or feeling different, or take some of the potential downsides to adoption, take it away, and that openness will cover up and cover up's not the right word, but openness will make it easier for adopted people not to feel any of those feelings that are possible with adoption.
Well, I will say that I remember my birth mother being around a little bit more than my birth father early on, but that went away pretty quickly. And so I've seen both sides fairly regularly, and now we're all on Facebook and have everybody's phone numbers.
Yeah.
I do remember it's probably been 20 years or so that I asked my parents, my adoptive parents, how it all happened and what happened, and then I learned that my birth parents were young, and that's not something that young teen parents can handle all the time, and so I kind of learned some of the more heavy stuff around then, and I've just been learning more as I go on, and I'm a parent myself now, so I kind of understand some of the struggles that they would have had to go through, and luckily it's been open.
The Andrew, what about you? Has open adoption taken away any of the sense of abandonment or not fitting in that some adopted people report?
Well, I think at this point we can all tell that my adoption, being an open adoption, written down on paper and legally, isn't quite exactly what it was. So for me, it was a very different experience. Honestly, I think it sounds more similar to Elizabeth's experience.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it was great in the sense that if I could get a hold of her, I could answer some things, but that was very, very, very rare. I mean, it's probably
Yeah.
happened less than a dozen times in my entire life.
Oh, okay.
So it was definitely harder for me when I was younger, especially middle school. When you guys brought that up, that threw me back because, like, the questions, like, because that's the time where everyone's going through change and everyone's comparing themselves to their parents, and they're saying, oh, my dad is 6 foot, so I'm probably going to be close to that kind of thing. And so it's like, that was really when I kind of started thinking about it more, and kind of realized that there is a difference. It bothered me for a while, but as I've gotten older, I don't see why it should be a big deal anymore. And I have a great relationship with my birth father, which is, it's a long story with all of that, but he didn't know I existed, we'll say. So that was a bit of a surprise when I found him when I was 18. He lived in Las Vegas, so I actually flew down there, and after we had done a DNA test secretly. But no, I mean, I would say it's hard for me to speak on
Yeah, that's
everything that
fair.
comes with an open adoption, because I wouldn't say I quite had one.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. I'd like to shift to talking about siblings, and I have two questions. First of all, siblings that your half siblings, or it could be full siblings, I suppose, that your children that your birth parents had either before or after you were born, and I'd like to hear about how those relationships are, and if it is, and if those relationships were important, are taking on more importance or less importance as you age. Taylor, what about you? You said you had five half
Okay, so I
brothers.
have 5 on each side. I know that much, but I don't know the paternal side.
Gotcha. Okay.
But so I was an only child. Or I am an only child. So the first one, so my birth mom's oldest kid, he's in high school now and stuff. So we had almost a decade of age difference, but even so, as like an 11-year-old, you're still kind of a kid in a sense. So you're like, ooh, like, I'm a sibling, like, this is kind of fun. So with him, I think it's the most sibling like.
Yeah.
I would say that, like, my oldest younger female, so my aunt's oldest daughter is about the same age as my oldest little brother. So they're like 2 or 3 months apart. Well, so I actually grew up with her a lot more. So I would like babysit her, and she would come over like for weekends and stuff, a lot more than my little brother. So I would say, in a sense, like, I really have what feels like 2 siblings, like a cousin who's a sibling and a little brother. The other ones, all of the rest are more well, so I've been a teacher, like, and a camp counselor for more than a decade. So it's more like I do teacher mode with them.
Yeah, it's less of a sibling relationship.
It's not. It's more of like, of like an aunt.
Yeah, where you're Yeah, given the age difference. Elizabeth, how about with you? Do either of I think you mentioned that your birth parents did have children. Um, has that been, I think I know the answer is that it's not a relationship that you have sought out from what you're saying. Was there ever a time that how was that relationship when you were younger?
Actually, that's an interesting question because I don't know for sure if I do. We think I do, but we don't know. Um, I learned just a few months before I cut off all communication with them from my birth aunt that she was alluding, she never said it outright, but she alluded that I was not my mother's first child. What happened to those other children, I don't know. I don't know if she knew. We know that my birth father, who again was never in the picture, did have other children, although again, he left, so we
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah.
So, it's always been something I've thought about. It's always been something kind of like I wish I could talk to them. I wish I could figure out who these guys are, and get their insights on my parents, especially my birth father's children, because I don't know him. But I have no idea how it even begin other than like hiring a private investigator, which I can't do.
DNA testing is, it's going to be, that's one thing in the future, but that has its ups and its downs as well. I mean, things
Yeah.
that you have to be very prepared for. Justin, what about you? Did either of your birth parents either have children before, since they were young? They probably didn't. Did they go on to have children?
My birth mother, I am the only one that she ever had. And my birth father, he got married and has three other kids. And so I've got three half siblings on that side.
Gotcha. And are they young enough that are old enough that you have a sibling relationship with them, or is there too great of an age gap?
They call me Big Brother. I am, of course, the oldest, and they are 1.5, 2.5, and 4 years younger than me. So they're fairly close in age.
Yeah, they are actually. Yeah, they are relatively close in age. Did you have a relationship with them as part of growing up? Or has that developed more when you've been on your own, had everybody's phone numbers and connect with them via Facebook or Instagram or whatever?
I think my earliest memory would be going over to their house, and it was kind of a family get together, and we got together with the older relatives who have since passed on, and having them tell stories. And then all the kids went out in the backyard to play, and so I was the oldest in the group, so I kind of had to play babysitter. It almost felt like, but it was a little different because I was playing with my siblings, and so that was a little bit different.
And then my last question is, let's see, those of you who have adopted siblings, Andrew, I think you do. Andrew, okay. So you have a brother that's adopted. So my question is, was his adoption open and more so than yours? Because yours really was not too open. So was his open adoption a better one, meaning that was more open and more supportive of the child than yours?
Yeah, definitely. My older brother, so like Ariel had brought up earlier, everyone handles this completely differently. So, and maybe it is.
Yeah, people think adoptees are like this uniform group. I mean, get real. I mean, they're as different as any other group of human beings. I know, it just drives me crazy.
They're human.
People say, yeah, exactly. And there's no such thing as any group of humans that, is similar. Anyway, that's a pet peeve of mine.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead.
No worries. No, my brother, actually, he does not care very much at all that he's adopted. So he's never really sat there and thought much of it. But his relationship with his mom was, I'd say it was pretty okay. She's someone who's constantly going through a tough patch in her life, but she's been supportive when she can be, and at least they got to hang out. I actually met her a couple of times when I was younger because my mom couldn't leave me at the house, so she would bring me with to go meet his mom. So from what I could tell, she was pretty supportive. I know that she's young enough to where my adopted parents actually do try and support her as well, when she's going through some tough things. So I would say it was definitely better relationship than mine.
Was that hard for you, knowing that he had a relationship that you didn't have? And was that because we hear that from parents? They say, I've got two kids, and one, we have a wonderful open adoption relationship, and the other one, the birth parents don't want our relationship, or there's addiction issues or whatever, and they worry what it's going to be like for their child, the child that doesn't have that. So was that hard for you?
It definitely was. So I'm a relatively sensitive person, just with just emotion stuff. So, and a deep thinker. So when I sit there and I have to experience this, it makes me think a lot. And yeah, it definitely was pretty tough on me at times. But as I got older and just understood everything a lot better, it just made more sense. And I kind of realized that even though he had that relationship with her, she still wasn't the greatest person in the world. So he's grown up to understand that as well. So they don't really talk much anymore. But yeah, when I was younger, a lot of things made me think like that.
Okay. Ariel, do you have an adopted sibling?
I do.
You do?
I have 6.
Well, that from your birth parents or from your
birth parents.
in your adopted? Okay.
Birth. So
what about in your adopted family? Are you an only child, or?
So I love when people ask me this question, because I'm an only child by blood, and I grew up an only child, but I have one older stepbrother on my adoptive side, so my adoptive mom's husband's son, and then I have 6 half-birth siblings, 2 on my birth father's side and 4 on my birth mom's side, ranging from my stepbrother is 32, 31. I'm 28, and my youngest half-birth sibling is 1. So I've grown up knowing all of them. I mean, I'm talking specifically about the birth side. So there's 6 there. They range in age. So 1, 4, 19, 20, and 25, I think. So all younger, 3 boys, 3 girls. I would definitely say, I was old enough, I was in high school and they were in elementary school. We had nothing in common. It was kind of a weird age, but especially the 2 girls, as I've gotten older, they're in their early 1920s now. I'm 28. They're really, really special to me. I think I try to be like a big sister to them, the person that they can go to and talk to about the things they don't want to tell their mom. The boys I'm not quite as close with. I mean, they're closer in age to me, but we just don't quite have that same relationship. And then the 1-year-old and the 4-year-old, obviously they're really small. They're the ones that live in Michigan. So don't see them as often. But it's been a lot of fun to have young siblings to grow up with, considering that I did grow up an only child. Up until I was 17, when my mom got remarried, I was an only child. So it's great. Everyone's in Portland except for the folks in Michigan. And it's been just a joy to have those siblings there.
And the last question is to you, Elizabeth. Were you an only child in your adoptive family?
I was, yeah.
Okay, then that answers the question. I just wanted to know if there was a difference in relationships, but if it's, as an only child, you didn't have another adopted sibling. Yes. Yeah, I don't know. Let me remind everyone that this show, as well as all the resources provided by Creating a Family, couldn't happen without partner agencies who believe in our mission of providing unbiased, accurate information to adoptive parents from the very beginning of the journey all the way through post-adoption. One of these partners is Vista Del Mar. They are a licensed nonprofit adoption agency with over 65 years of experience helping to create families. They offer home study only services, as well as they have a full service infant adoption and an international and a foster to adopt program. And with Spence Chapin is a licensed and accredited nonprofit organization in the New York City metro area that has been offering adoption services for more than 100 years. They have and are known for their robust post-adoption services provided to all members of the triad: adoptees, adoptive parents, and birth parents. And these services they believe in and they continue to promote. They are there for their families from the beginning, but continuing to be there for them post-adoption. Well, thank you guys so very much for being on today. I can't tell you how much I've been looking forward to this interview because I truly believe that adoptive people are the experts on adoption, and we really, really need to listen to you guys and learn more about what the experience is like from your standpoint. So I'm truly appreciative. Justin Roberts, Ariel Verosky, I'm sorry,
Got it.
Andrew Friesen, Elizabeth Rentschler, and Taylor Roquer. Thank you so much for being with us today, and for everyone else, as we always say at the end, keep in mind that the opinions shared here are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the position of creating a family, our partners, or our underwriters. Also, the information given in this interview is general advice. To understand how it applies to your specific situation, you need to work with your adoption professional. And to our audience, thank you for joining us, and I will see you next week.